When Lisa told her family that an old friend from Japan would be staying with them for 10 days, she worried about the guest room, the towels, and whether the house looked welcoming enough. The kitchen barely crossed her mind. It was clean by her standards. The counters were wiped regularly. The dishes went through the dishwasher. The trash went out every few days. Nothing smelled bad, and nobody in the family had ever described the kitchen as dirty. Then Yuki arrived from Japan, and within the first 24 hours, Lisa began noticing tiny moments of hesitation. Yuki never complained. She never lectured anyone. But when Lisa's teenage son walked through the kitchen wearing the same sneakers he had worn outside, Yuki's eyes followed his feet for half a second. When Lisa rinsed raw chicken under the faucet, Yuki quietly moved the salad bowl farther from the sink. When the same cutting board that had held meat was quickly wiped and used for vegetables, there was another pause. None of those reactions meant every Japanese person would feel the same way, and plenty of American homes follow strict kitchen hygiene. But certain habits that feel completely ordinary in some Western households can clash sharply with the way cleanliness, cross-contamination, and food handling are approached in many Japanese homes. What surprised Lisa most was that the differences were not about having an expensive kitchen or scrubbing every surface constantly. They were about boundaries. What belongs outside stays outside. What touches raw food does not casually touch ready-to-eat food. What looks clean is not automatically treated as hygienically clean. By the end of Yuki's visit, Lisa would change 9 habits she had practiced for years without thinking about them. The first difference appeared before anybody cooked a single meal. Yuki arrived, stepped through the front door, and immediately stopped at the entrance to remove her shoes. Lisa had expected that. She knew taking off outdoor shoes was common in Japanese homes. What she had not expected was how strange the opposite behavior would begin to look once she watched it through someone else's eyes. Lisa's family wore shoes everywhere. Her son came home from school, walked across the entryway through the living room and straight into the kitchen. Her husband sometimes entered through the garage carrying groceries while still wearing the shoes he had used at the gas station parking lot and hardware store. Nobody thought about the floor because food was prepared on the counter, not on the tiles. But Yuki came from a culture where the Genkan creates a strong physical and psychological line between outside and inside. Outdoor shoes stop there. Once Lisa noticed that boundary, she started seeing everything. Her own shoes traveled across public bathrooms, sidewalks, parking lots, wet pavement, dirt, whatever had been dropped outside. Then those same soles stood beside the kitchen island while somebody cooked dinner. The family was not eating from the floor, of course, but kitchen tools occasionally fell. Grocery bags were sometimes placed down and lifted onto another surface. A child could sit on the floor and then climb onto a chair. The issue was not panic about germs. It was that an obvious source of outside dirt had been invited into a food preparation space for no real benefit. Within 2 days, a basket appeared near Lisa's entrance. Outdoor shoes stopped traveling into the kitchen. Nobody's life became more difficult. The second difference was almost invisible because everybody believed they were already doing it. Lisa washed her hands, so did her husband. But washing hands before cooking had become a vague idea, rather than a clear boundary. She might come home from the supermarket, carry bags inside, check a text message, move packages around, open the refrigerator, and then begin preparing dinner. Her son might pet the dog, grab a handful of shredded cheese, and continue helping. Her husband might take out the trash and return to chopping vegetables after a quick rinse under water. During Yuki's first evening, Lalisa noticed that Yuki washed her hands before helping with food, then washed them again after handling raw ingredients. It was not theatrical. It lasted only a short time, but the timing was deliberate. Suddenly, Lisa began seeing the problem with her own routine. Phones, garbage cans, pets, raw meat packages, refrigerator handles, and grocery carts all entered the same sequence as food preparation. The hands looked clean. That did not mean they had remained clean. Lisa began keeping soap accessible and stopped treating one hand-washing session at the beginning of dinner as protection for the entire cooking process. The most surprising part was how little extra effort it required. The habit had never been difficult. It had simply lacked clear moments when the family knew it should happen. Then came the chicken. Lisa opened a package of raw chicken breasts for dinner, carried them to the sink, turned on the faucet, and started rinsing them. It was something she had seen relatives do for years. The water made the meat feel cleaner. Yuki did not say anything until Lisa asked whether Japanese families wash chicken differently. Yuki hesitated and explained that she had been taught not to wash raw chicken because splashing water could spread contamination around the sink and nearby surfaces. Lisa looked at the faucet, the dish rack, the sponge, and the bowl of vegetables sitting only a few feet away. For the first time, she imagined the invisible direction of the droplets. The chicken itself would soon be cooked thoroughly. The lettuce beside the sink would not. What had always felt like a cleaning step could actually distribute the very thing she was trying to remove. From then on, raw chicken no longer went under running water. If excess liquid needed to be removed, it could be handled without turning the sink into a splash zone. This became one of the most uncomfortable discoveries of the entire visit because the habit had felt so obviously hygienic. Lisa learned that kitchen cleanliness sometimes works backward. An action can look cleaner while making the environment less safe. The cutting board exposed the same contradiction. Lisa owned 3 cutting boards, but usually used whichever one was closest. One evening, she sliced raw chicken, moved it into a pan, rinsed the board quickly, and began cutting cucumber for a salad. Yuki's reaction was subtle, but this time Lisa caught it immediately. She stopped. The board looked clean. The knife looked clean. There were no visible pieces of chicken remaining. But the vegetables were going to be eaten without the high heat that would cook the meat. That changed the calculation. In many careful kitchens, including guidance promoted in Japan, raw meat and ready-to-eat foods are treated as separate stages. Some households use different boards. Others wash and sanitize carefully between tasks, or prepare vegetables first and raw meat afterward. The exact system matters less than the boundary. Lisa realized that her old sequence depended too much on appearance. If the board no longer looked dirty, she assumed the problem had disappeared. But a kitchen can look spotless and still transfer contamination from one food to another. She began preparing salad ingredients before opening raw meat. When that was not practical, the board and knife received a real wash instead of a ceremonial rinse. The family already owned everything required to do this. No new gadget was necessary. The refrigerator held another surprise. Lisa had always believed cold solved almost everything. If meat was inside the refrigerator, it was safe enough. So a package of raw beef might sit on an upper shelf beside yogurt. Chicken could be placed wherever space happened to exist. Sometimes the package remained on the supermarket tray with only the original wrapping between the raw juices and everything else. Yuki stored raw meat more deliberately, and Lisa began thinking about what would happen if a package leaked. Gravity would decide the rest. A few drops from the top shelf could travel onto food underneath, including products that might never be cooked. Lisa rearranged the refrigerator so raw meat and fish were contained and kept away from foods ready to eat. The change also forced her to confront another habit, stuffing the refrigerator until cold air had almost nowhere to circulate. After a large grocery trip, every shelf was packed. Containers touched the back wall. Produce drawers were overflowing. Lisa had considered that abundance. Food safety guidance treated an overloaded refrigerator much less romantically. Cold storage works best when the appliance can actually maintain the conditions it was designed to maintain. So Lisa stopped seeing every empty inch as wasted space. A little breathing room made ingredients easier to see, reduced forgotten food, and made cleaning spills much simpler. A less crowded refrigerator looked strangely calmer. It also stopped hiding last week's leftovers behind this week's groceries. The countertop became the next battlefield. Lisa frequently thawed frozen meat there. She would take chicken or beef out in the morning, leave it on a plate, and expect it to be ready by dinner. It was convenient because the center softened faster than it did in the refrigerator. Yuki seemed uncomfortable when she saw it, and again, the issue was not a Japanese preference for doing things differently just because they were Japanese. It was temperature. Leaving frozen food at room temperature can allow the outer portions to warm while the center is still thawing. Lisa had never thought about the food as having multiple temperatures at once. To her, it was simply still frozen or thawed. She switched to planning ahead and thawing food in the refrigerator or using an appropriate faster method when time was short. That small change revealed how many kitchen shortcuts existed only because dinner had not been planned a few hours earlier. She had been using room temperature to solve a scheduling problem. Leftovers created a similar problem at the other end of the meal. After dinner, Lisa often left the serving dishes on the counter while the family talked, watched television, or cleaned gradually. A large pot might sit there until everyone remembered it before bed. If it still smelled good and looked normal, it went into the refrigerator. Yuki's routine was noticeably different. Food that needed to be saved was handled sooner. Large amounts could be divided into smaller, shallower containers so they cooled more efficiently. Leftovers did not spend the entire evening decorating the stove. Lisa had always believed that refrigeration was what made leftovers safe. She had paid far less attention to the hours before refrigeration. Once again, the difference was timing. Food did not become questionable only when a bad smell appeared. The invisible part mattered first, so dinner cleanup changed. The family could still sit and talk. But the food that needed refrigeration was put away before everyone mentally left the kitchen. It was a 5-minute habit that removed hours of uncertainty later. Then Yuki picked up Lisa's dishcloth. That was when Lisa became genuinely embarrassed. The cloth had started the morning clean. By dinner, it had wiped water from the counter, dried someone's hands, cleaned a coffee spill, brushed crumbs from the table, and sat damp beside the sink. Nobody knew exactly how many jobs it had performed. The sponge beside it was even harder to think about. It remained wet for much of the day and was used on plates, pans, cutting boards, and whatever else needed scrubbing. Lisa replaced both occasionally, but there was no system beyond smell and appearance. Japanese household food safety advice places attention on keeping towels, dishcloths, brushes, and sponges clean, washing them properly, and replacing heavily soiled cloths. Lisa suddenly saw her multi-purpose towel differently. The family was carefully washing a countertop and then possibly wiping it again with something that had spent the day collecting whatever the kitchen offered. She began separating jobs: a clean towel for hands, cloths that could be changed frequently for surfaces, sponges rinsed thoroughly and allowed to dry rather than being abandoned in a puddle. Nothing looked dramatically different, yet the kitchen felt more controlled. She stopped judging cleaning tools by whether they looked disgusting enough to replace and began asking whether they were actually clean enough to continue cleaning something else. The final habit was the least dramatic and perhaps the most revealing. Lisa liked a kitchen that looked clean, but she often cleaned around clutter instead of removing it. A fruit bowl, mail delivery, packages, reusable shopping bags, the coffee machine, vitamins, a stack of school papers, and several appliances could all occupy the counters while she prepared food in whatever space remained. If raw ingredients entered the scene, the available work area became even smaller. Japanese food safety guidance for the home includes a surprisingly ordinary idea before cooking. Look around the kitchen. Is the garbage taken care of? Are the towels clean? Is soap available? Is the work surface cleared enough to use properly? Lisa realized she had separated organization from hygiene. Clutter was annoying, but she did not consider it a food safety issue. Yet a crowded counter encouraged shortcuts. A cutting board might be placed beside unopened mail. Grocery bags could touch the preparation area. Clean plates competed with packages. There was less room to separate raw food from everything else. She began clearing the main preparation surface before cooking, not after. The difference felt almost luxurious. Nothing had been remodeled. The counter had simply been allowed to function as a counter. By the end of Yuki's 10-day visit, Lisa's kitchen did not look dramatically different from the kitchen Yuki had entered. The cabinets were the same. The appliances were the same. The counters were the same color. But the movement inside the room had changed. Outdoor shoes stopped at the entrance instead of continuing through the cooking area. Hands were washed at meaningful transitions instead of once, whenever someone remembered. Raw chicken no longer went under the faucet. Cutting boards and knives were treated differently after contact with raw meat. Raw foods were contained in the refrigerator instead of being placed wherever a gap appeared. The refrigerator itself had enough room to function without resembling a puzzle. Frozen meat no longer spent the afternoon thawing on the counter. Leftovers did not wait until bedtime to enter the refrigerator. Towels and sponges were treated as cleaning tools that also needed to be cleaned. And the main preparation area began each cooking session clear enough to make good decisions easier. What fascinated Lisa was how few of these changes involved actual scrubbing. Before Yuki arrived, Lisa had believed kitchen hygiene meant using strong cleaners and making surfaces shine. If the sink sparkled and the counter had no crumbs, the room looked sanitary. But many of the habits she noticed during the visit dealt with contamination before cleaning became necessary. Do not carry outdoor dirt deeper into the home. Do not spread raw chicken water around the sink. Do not let the same dirty tool move directly from raw meat to salad. Do not let juices leak onto foods that will never be cooked. Do not allow a damp cloth to become the universal answer to every mess in the room. In other words, cleanliness was not simply the ability to remove dirt afterward. It was the ability to prevent different categories of dirt from traveling in the first place. That concept began to make sense beyond Japanese culture. Hospitals separate clean and contaminated zones. Restaurants organize food handling to reduce cross contact. Even a simple bathroom has an intuitive boundary between the toilet and the toothbrush. The kitchen deserves the same kind of thinking. Lisa's mistake had been assuming that because everything happened inside one room, everything inside that room could casually share space. Yuki never once told Lisa that American kitchens were disgusting. In fact, she complimented several meals and repeatedly thanked the family for hosting her. And that became important to Lisa because culture is never as simple as one country being clean and another being dirty. Plenty of Japanese homes are messy. Plenty of Western households follow food safety practices more carefully than Lisa ever had. Families inside the same country can behave completely differently, but cultural contrast can still reveal habits that otherwise remain invisible. Lisa had washed chicken because everyone around her once treated it as normal. Her family wore shoes through the kitchen because nobody had ever considered the kitchen floor part of the cleanliness equation. The cutting board received a quick rinse because visible dirt had disappeared. The sponge survived too long because it was supposed to be the thing that made other objects clean. The leftovers stayed out because nothing looked wrong with them yet. Each habit survived for the same reason. It felt normal, and normal habits are the hardest ones to see. A few weeks after Yuki returned to Japan, Lisa was preparing dinner when her son entered through the garage. He walked 2 steps toward the kitchen, stopped, looked down at his shoes, and turned around. Lisa laughed. He had remembered. A few minutes later, he washed his hands and began helping her cut vegetables. The vegetables came first. The raw chicken remained packaged until the salad was finished. When Lisa opened it, the chicken went directly from package to preparation area without a trip through the sink. Afterward, the board and knife were cleaned thoroughly and the chicken was cooked completely. Nothing about the scene felt extreme anymore. That may be the most useful lesson behind all 9 habits. A hygienic kitchen does not require fear. It requires boundaries. Outside and inside. Raw and ready to eat. Clean and merely clean looking. Cold and room temperature. Fresh cloth and yesterday's damp cloth. Food being served and food being stored. Once those boundaries become automatic, the kitchen actually becomes easier to manage because fewer mistakes need to be corrected later. And perhaps that is why some ordinary Western kitchen habits can be so startling to visitors from Japan. The difference is not necessarily that one person cares about cleanliness and the other does not. They may simply have been taught to notice different boundaries. The uncomfortable question is what happens when a household finally notices its own. Because once Lisa watched water splash away from raw chicken, saw outdoor shoes cross the kitchen floor, and thought about what her damp cloth had touched all day, she could not unsee any of it. And after that, changing the habit was easier than pretending it still looked normal.